So I was going through this internal dialogue, thinking about Shiva Asa Tammuz. What is it? How has it impacted my life? How does it impact my life? How does it impact the life of others? And my thoughts wandered to the idea of something called the pleasure machine. The pleasure machine was a thought experiment by a scientist who wrote a book in 1974 named Robert Nozick. His idea was as follows. Would a person prefer a life of being connected to a pleasure machine whereby he'd be able to fulfill every single last pleasure he ever would dream of having? There'd be one small hitch, is it would only be in his mind. But for him, the experience would be identical to reality and he would not know the difference. How many people would choose to hook up to the pleasure machine? As we progress further through history with the technological revolution, his thought experiment is becoming dangerously close to becoming a reality. It's not unimaginable that in the near future we'll be able to connect ourselves to some kind of machine, be fed intravenously, and live a life of complete and total pleasure. We could become whatever we chose in the illusion of the machine. So I've often asked people the question, who would you be chosen? Would you choose to hook yourself up to that machine? Most people say no, but there's actually a more interesting question. If you'd be hooked up to that machine, familiar with it, and they'd switch it off for a moment and ask you the question, would you like to return to life, or do you want to go back to the machine? I think the reaction would be slightly different. You're already in that world. You're seduced by those pleasures, and now someone's waking you up and bringing you back into the reality, the painful reality of the moment. How many people would embrace that opportunity? When you think about the 3 weeks, it's very much like being woken up from being connected to a pleasure machine. Our society has inundated us with messages that proclaim happiness is the place to be. Avoid at all costs confronting negative emotions, and has painted a picture perfect of a life which is pleasurable, which is comfortable, and which doesn't have the raw, deep melancholy and pain of perhaps what reality possesses. So the 3 weeks essentially are us being disconnected from the pleasure machine that we may be tending to be living in, certainly me, and allowing us an opportunity to essentially do something extremely fundamental. Reclaim our lives. Shiva Asa Tammuz, heralding in the 3-week period, which is called Bein HaMetzorim. On either side, you have Shiva Asa Tammuz, you have Tisha B'Av, and we are confined between those two narrow straits, having no room to move. These two events frame a dimension of the reality that we're experiencing and we'd much prefer to avoid. We're being disconnected and now we're being stared, we're confronted by the pain. In other words, Shiva Asa Tammuz, as with all our spiritual work, is not commemorative. It's not, oh my gosh, back in the day, do you know what happened? It's so sad. If you ask me, I'd say, let bygones be bygones. What happened, happened. My dahava, who cares? The Rambam in Hilchas Tainis, he introduces, Perek Chamishi, he introduces the idea of the tinios. There are days that the Jewish people fast because of what happened to them. Now, why do you do that? In order to create an experiential awakening, disconnection from the dream, but not just to be able to be disconnected from the illusion that we tend to like to live in, but to open up a new way forward. It's about something proactive. Something has to change. After Shiva Asa B'Tammuz, when we leave the fast tonight, we have to think, oh my gosh, I had the shift. Something transported me to a new understanding, a new insight. I feel different. I can do different. I want to be different. I want to reclaim my life. It will be a reminder of our bad deeds, and those of our forefathers, which are identical to what we're doing now. Until those tough times were caused by these things. So the Rambam completely reframes the perspective of what these commemorations are. Because we do commemorate. In other words, there is an association between an event to why we're fasting. But don't fall into the trap of thinking we're fasting to remember and to mourn over what happened then. Everything has to be contemporary in this moment, and rather it's as follows. We live in a life and there's lots of stuff going wrong. Shiva Asa B'Tammuz provides us with a lens to see what's going on. There's a lot of disruption, pain, stuff which isn't going as it's meant to be going. But how do I actually define the precise nature of the beast? What is going wrong and how is it going wrong? So what the events allow us to do is they provide us with historical illustrations of contemporary failings. What does it look like when you're doing all these things wrong? Well, the walls of the city of Jerusalem are breached, whatever that means. The tablets are shattered. The Sefer Torah is burnt by Apostomus. The Korban HaTamid is bottled. An idol is placed in the Heichal. Those aren't events. Those are illustrations of states of connection or disconnection which become embodied in the occurrences which occurred. So when we examine the nature of what occurred, we're able to extrapolate, to extract from them the principle, and then find out how it reapplies to our here and now in our world. And therefore it's extremely relevant. But what we have to do is find out what the principle is and see how it continues, and that's what we're trying to gain insight into today. So the Rambam goes and he lists five things, which are the Mishnah in Tainis. And he says they are as follows. V'shiva asa b'Tammuz chamisha dvarim iru boi. Number one, nishtabru aluchos. 5 things happened. The tablets that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down from Har Sinai, the Mount Sinai, those tablets were broken. Number 1. Number 2, ubat latomid. There was a regular daily offering which was given perpetually from the time the Torah is given at Har Sinai until the point in time of Shiva Asa B'Tammuz, and then it ceased to be. There was a cessation. That happened in the time Yibais Rishon. That was in the time of the first temple. So the Talmud, which had gone for the thousands of years since the giving of the Torah until that point in time in the first temple, halted. V'huvka Yerushalayim, b'churban sheni, the walls of Jerusalem were breached in the second temple period. V'saraf Apostomus haroshes HaTorah, there was an evil man called Apostomus, he burnt a Sefer Torah, v'hemid tselem b'heichel, and he placed a idol in the sanctuary. I want to focus on, of these 5 things, explore 2 of them. One is the breaking of the tablets, Shviras Aluchos, and the other one is the breaching of the walls of Yerushalayim. There's this anticipation as the Jewish people are rescued from slavery in Egypt. The sea splits to accommodate their exodus, and they are thrust into a desert with no hope of survival. Would it not be for some kind of elaborate divine intervention, clouds that surround them, water that comes miraculously from the ground, and manna that descends from heaven. They're in a state of absolute and total spiritual, ecstatic existence. And through this process, day after day, they go through series of spiritual refinement until their climactic day occurs, where they're anticipating to receive the Torah, and they hear the Ten Commandments, and they wait a 40-day period for Moshe Rabbeinu to come down and deliver the goods in the intact, the actual body of the tablets. And Moshe Rabbeinu comes down the mountain, and he's got these tablets. And they are crafted by God. They're completely spiritual. And the writing has been engraved by supernatural forces of the hand of God. Engraved onto the tablets. But in the interim, while Moshe Rabbeinu had gone up, on their last day, they miscalculated his return, and they succumbed to the worship of the Chet HaEgel, the golden calf. And in response to Moshe Rabbeinu seeing their joyous celebrations around the calf, instead of him transferring the luchos to the people of Israel, he slams them down on the ground and they are shattered. In other words, instead of the luchos being given, the shards of the luchos were given. This was almost an anti-receiving of the Torah. It was a receiving of a broken Torah. It was almost the connection of Torah being received was a rejection of Torah. So the anticipated event was turned upside down. And that signifies the first of the calamitous events which occurred on Shiva Tammuz. What is the significance? Who cares? Who cares? It's big, it's terrible, it's tragic. But we fixed it up with the second luchos. The second tablets were bought finally on Yom Kippur, and that kind of solved the problem. So what's the big deal about this? So the Gemara in Eruvin, Daf Nun Daled, says, what would have been if the Jewish people would have received those first version of the tablets? The Gemara in Eruvin says, number one, it would have been impossible to forget Torah. Number two, it would be impossible for any nation ever to rule over the Jewish people. What does it mean? What does it mean? Why? What does it mean that you wouldn't forget Torah? What does it mean that no one could rule over the Jewish people? If you think the idea about forgetting, the nature of the human brain is to forget information. It's just the way we're built. No one remembers everything unless there's some kind of quirk in their cognitive structure. They have a photographic memory, which is a very rare thing. Most people remember and forget. When the Gemara says that it would never be forgotten, I'm not convinced that the Gemara means that it's referring to information, because information is constantly forgotten. That's just the nature of being human. Do you know what's not forgotten? Process isn't forgotten. When I wake up in the morning, I don't have to review which leg I should take out of my bed. It doesn't require some kind of new learning skill. Once I've integrated something into how I behave, it becomes second nature. It's intuition. So I would venture to say that had the Jews received the first version of the luchos, which were completely spiritually saturated, and the luchos are always a synonym for the two parts of the heart, and that's why even, not here, but in most shuls, there's this arched. The luchos look like two, they've got this like the circular little mini dome on top of them to represent the two tablets, which was not an accurate representation because they were actually flat on top, to hint to us the fact that they represent the heart. Kasveim al luach libecha, the pasuk says, write them on the luach, the tablet of your heart. Your heart is a tablet, and had the Jews received the Torah, it would have been engraved on their experience that it would be impossible to not do what the Torah says. In other words, the mitzvahs would move from external to internal, and there would be intuitive ways of being. Just like if a bright light is shone in my eyes, intuitively I will have a reflex action of closing my eyes. Just like when I touch these pages, I feel the tactile sensation. I'm not choosing to feel it. It's the way I'm wired. Had the Jews received the Torah, they would have been wired to respond in the way that everything would be spiritual. When they'd approach food which wasn't kosher, it wouldn't be a choice, it would be a repulsion. In other words, they would be integrated spiritual beings. If you're an integrated spiritual being, no one can be on top of you. And therefore, the loss of Shiva Tammuz means we no longer have that automatic access to spirituality to the degree that it's part and parcel with our very fabric of who we are. I'll give you another analogy to this. There's in the Shir of Hazinu, the Moshe Rabbeinu has this poem which is written to prompt the Jewish people to some kind of realization and tshuva. Hala Hashem tikmilu zois. And he's quite harsh with them. He says, is this how you respond to Hashem? Am novel v'loi chacham. And I think the article translation says something like a vile and unwise nation. Am novel means a vile nation. You horrible. But if you look at the Targum, you get a completely different version of what novel means. The Targum says, the Unklus, he says, HaKodam Hashem atun gomlin da, in front of Hashem you do this. Amo de kabilo raisa. You vile nation, translation of vile, you nation that received the Torah. What's so vile about receiving the Torah? Is that a horrible thing? Receiving the Torah is horrible? Doesn't make that much sense. So if you go more deeply into the word naval, linbol in Hebrew doesn't mean vile, it means to wither. Something withers when it becomes disconnected from its source of nourishment. For example, if you've got a pot plant and it's connected to its source of nourishment, you water it, so it grows. You stop watering it, and it has no source of nourishment, so it withers. If you understand that, it means as follows. Am novel, you're a withered nation. Why are you withered? And what has that got to do with receiving the Torah? Well, let's go back to it. Where does the Torah lie? What is the Torah? What is it? So there are people who think that Judaism is a religion. It's an ism. And they think that the mitzvahs are ritualistic practices that you have to do in order to maintain an adherence to this religious credo. It's a theology that you should subscribe to if you're a believer. Seemingly from this Targum, you see something completely different. Judaism is not a religion. And let's go through 3 levels of reality and peel them off like the skin of an onion. On the outer side of reality, you've got something which is called the physical reality that we respond to by using the vehicles of our senses to navigate the world. My eyes give me a visual information about what's going on around me. My ear is an auditory one, my hand's a tactile one, my nose an olfactory one, and my taste, my tongue a taste. So I get to experience the world. And using these vehicles, I'm able to function. And using my accompanying brain power, I'm able to develop laws of physics and chemistry to explain in abstract terms the practical working of the universe. Level 1. And we all relate to that, and we all respond to that. And when I speak about the laws of nature, no one looks upon them as ritualistic. There is a law. Do not jump off high buildings, for if you do so, the law of gravity will strike vengeance. No, it's like don't jump off a high building because there's an attraction to the earth and your body has mass, perhaps a little bit more than you'd like it to have, and therefore you're going to be drawn down and you're going to come crashing down on the ground. It's just the way it is. And what happens if a person goes to the top of the building and he says, do you know what? I don't go for it. I'm not the kind of guy who subscribes to gravity. It's not my thing. Like, I've got an alternative lifestyle. I want to do other stuff. And he goes to the top of the building, and he goes, there you go. I'm not going to go for this gravity thing. And he takes one step off, and it's unfortunately the last step that he ever takes. Because it's just a reality. It's just the way it is. So there's a physical reality, and you can't fight with the physical reality because it just is. Underneath the physical reality, there's a deeper reality. It's called your emotional reality. It also has its own laws of cause and effect, way more complex, way more sophisticated, and much harder to pick up on. Because people are different. And when you have one person responding to an emotional stimulus in one way, someone else will respond differently. And to navigate the complexities of emotional cues is a skill that some people never get. They just don't get there. They don't pick it up because it's very hard to gauge. But when a person has it, he sees a world that the person who doesn't have it is completely oblivious to. Emotional intelligence is not as obvious as the physical world. But when you see it, you see it. And when you don't see it, you don't even believe it exists. Underneath the emotional reality, there's a deeper reality. And that deeper reality is the reality of the spiritual world. And all these laws are the same. They're not rituals. They're explanations of cause and effect. If you do this, this will happen. If you go to a person and most people who are attacked emotionally with scorn and derision will feel emotionally disturbed by their attack. This is the way it goes. It's cause and effect. So there's cause and effect in the physical world, there's cause and effect in the emotional world, and there's cause and effect in the spiritual world. Which means, if we would be spiritually intuitives, just like I won't walk off the edge of a cliff, I won't do something which is spiritually destructive to myself. Not because I'm a good boy, it's because it's just obvious and evident to me. Avram Avinu, the patriarch and I suppose the greatest spiritual innovator of all time, kept the whole Torah. He kept the whole thing. How did he keep it? Who taught him? Where was the Har Sinai that he turned up at? It wasn't anywhere. The Gemara says he learned it by looking inside. His inner world became his teacher. And as he dived more deeply into his own self, he discovered the entire spiritual universe. And it became absolutely visible to him. And when he kept Shabbat, it wasn't that he said, there's this law that I have to keep Shabbos, but as Friday drew towards a close, he knew exactly how to relate to this new spiritual reality. It was an intuition. He knew that he shouldn't do this and he should do that. Just as much as we know that when there's a hill, we have to lean forward, and when we're going down a hill, we have to lean back to change the angle of our body. It's just the way we work. We're kind of interfacing, we're interacting, we're getting feedback from the world around us. So Avram Avinu knew that. In other words, Avram Avinu was connected to his source of nourishment. He knew what was inside of himself. Avram Avinu did not need a Har Sinai because he was connected. He was growing, he was flourishing. And therefore, would he need a Har Sinai? No, why? Am Novel. But then the Jewish people unfortunately lost that intuitive connection. And they became an Am Novel. They became a withered nation. They lost their capacity to delve deeply inside of self and thereby gain access to the spiritual insight, perception of the world. So they are Am Novel. They become a withered nation. And when they become a withered nation, what do you do? What do you do? Now that we've lost the spiritual intuition, so how in the world do we react to that? We have to make a plan. So the Borei Olam, in his wisdom and greatness, created an alternative path to spiritual intuition. It was called the giving of the Torah. And had it worked the way it was designed, so what would have happened is humanity would have shifted, the Jewish people would have become all like Avram Avinu through intervention. It would have been an intervention. The Torah would have been given to them, and instead of them discovering spiritual reality through the experience of internal search, they would have been given it as a present. And that would have been the celebration of Shiva Asar Tammuz. But things went wrong. Things went wrong, and because things went wrong, there was a disconnect that then became part and parcel of our lives today. What we're focusing on today is how Torah and mitzvahs has shifted from being an intuition to being a practice and a ritual. That Judaism, as opposed to being an articulation of the way the world works, has now become a theology and a religion. That's the destruction of the Torah. That's the breaking of the luchos. That's the rejection of the notion of what Torah is on its ultimate level. And it's become so deeply ingrained in our communities that very often people don't even know that there's another option. They don't understand that the Torah is an intuitive reaction to the world. One example I often test people with: meet an average person who's a serious davener. That means he prays 3 times a day, consistently. He prays the morning prayer, the afternoon prayer, the night prayer. He's there, present, shockling, giving away his God. Say to him, when was the last time you watched the sunset? He looks at you and he goes, I don't know. Well, don't you think that's important? He's really like, what do you want from me? Like, what do you want from me? So he goes, maybe. So you say, well, are you aware of the way that at the end of the day, the shadows get longer, the sun starts to make its way towards the west, and then in this moving, melancholy moment, that deep red orb dives beneath the horizon, leaving the sky studded with diamond stars. And he goes and he says, what are you talking about? What is this, poetry class? So you go, okay. So you say to him, well, let me ask you another question. He goes, okay. I say, do you see the unicorn? No, he thinks he's properly lost it. He's insane. I said, did you see the unicorn? He goes, no, I don't see the unicorn. I said, what happens if I start to talk about the unicorn? He said, well, I think you would be mad. So I say, okay, brilliant. Now, when you say the first bracha in Ma'ariv, which is describing the sunset, what are you doing? And he goes, oh, I didn't know that's what I was doing. Well, what do you think I was doing? What do you mean what I think I was doing? I've got to say these words so I can check the fact that I've done this thing. So I said the words. No. This is how you relate to the passage of time from day to night. You articulate, you describe this process and the way you're able to access the beauty of the transition from day to night and the spiritual force, the underlying spiritual energy which drives the show. It's because you're conscious and aware of the world around you and you're looking for words and come along and they give us the words to express that moment that captured us. With the sun setting. No, I didn't know that. Meaning, we are disenfranchised from our Judaism because we think it's Judaism. And we think mitzvahs are things you've got to do because when you do them, then you feel that release of guilt from not having done them had you not done them. That's it. So what are we? We're caught up in religious practice. We're doing a religion with the rituals. It's got nothing to do with Judaism, because there's no such thing as Judaism. There's something called Torah. And it's meant to be the thing we are, not the thing we practice. So the first thing that we're mourning, coming into contact with, confronting today is the painful reality that as we look around us, we see the destruction. Every time we walk in a shul, if we look carefully, we may be able to pick up on the luchos being broken in front of our very eyes. And that's tragic. And that's way better to be connected to the pleasure machine and not confront this rude reality. Number 1. Number 2, Huvka'ir. The walls of the city of Jerusalem were breached. And the Rambam says that happened in the Churban Sheni, second temple. Who cares? The walls are breached. We're already doing 3 weeks' time, we're going to do the whole big Beis HaMikdash destruction thing. Why do you have to make a special issue out of the walls? So think about it. Halachically, when there are walls around a city, it has a very different status. It's called a reshus hayachid. It's a private domain. It means that all the people in this encircled encampment, in this gated community, have a single identity. They're a collective. They are a community. And what happens when you break down those walls? You shatter the community. Huf Ka'ir is an illustration of the communal dissipation of the Jewish people. That's what happened on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. Breaking the walls means the other thing that went wrong is we are no longer together. We're no longer a tzibur. So you can say to me, listen, what do you mean I'm not a tzibur? I've got the minyan I daven in. And of course, the minyan I would never step into. Tzibur means everybody together. Tkar b'shofar gadol cheriseinu, baruch atah Hashem, mekabetz nidchei amo Yisrael. Mekabetz nidchei amo Yisrael. The ultimate vision of redemption is a return of community. And community doesn't mean my community. It means every single Jewish person becomes a part of exactly the same community. Tzibur means everybody together. Huvkar means that we do have pockets and cliques of people that get together. But when I think about everybody else, are they mine or are they outside of the circle? Are they us or are they them? And the minute there's an us and them in any aspect of the Jewish people, the community has been fractured and the walls have been breached. Now, how does this pan out? There were many years that I spent sitting in the seats that you're presently sitting on, but in a different location, and Reb Moshe Shapiro would come and speak on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. And this is one of the things that he would perpetually refer to, this idea of the disruption of the tzibur, of the community. And he once quoted the Gemara in Brachos in Daf Ches, which says, Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu, Kol ha'osek b'Torah u'b'gimulus chasodim, u'mispalel im hatzibur. Three things. He's preoccupied with Torah and doing kind things for other people. And he davens b'tzibur. He prays with a tzibur. Ma'ale olav ki'ilu podeini li u'levonai mibein u'meis ha'olam. I consider it as if he has redeemed me and my children from being amongst the nations. In other words, the tzibur is a return to the ideal state. And obviously, the fracturing of the tzibur is a descent into a state where we no longer can carry forward with us the mission that we're given. So now, there was once speaking to a young married man, and one of the things that I engage in is preparing people to go into the field of outreach in Kiruv. And I was talking to him, and he said to me, I don't get it. I said, what? He said, I mean, why should I reach out to these people? So I said, well, they're Jews. And he said, yeah, but I don't relate to them. Like that, to me, they're just like weird. They're not part of me. My community, I've got this nice chill place, my little haven, and I got all the guys who wear the same clothes as me, and they speak in the same jargon as me, and they do the same things as me. Those are my boys. But this guy, he looks different, he behaves differently, he's got no connection to me whatsoever. That for me there was it, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, in front of my very eyes. So he said, come, can you bring me any proofs? Bring me a proof that they also considered part of the tzibur. I thought, whoa. So I gave him Chofetz Chaim's book, Choimes Hadas, which goes into the chiyuv to reach out to every single Jewish person. I don't think he ever gave it back to me, but he's not doing Kiruv. That's a bit of a tragedy. And that's kind of the fracturing of the tzibur, where we look at people outside of our own circle. It doesn't matter which the circle is, and they're different. They're the other. And therefore, there's no interest. There's no interest in reconnecting. And a kind of a consequence of this is it's almost the other extreme. When a person becomes so insecure about his own Torah and mitzvahs that the only way he can get some level of security is by persuading and convincing other people to join the club. And to put another, like a little bit of a notch in his belt when every time, I made that guy frum. I made him frum. That's kind of that's also no tzibur, but it's a very sick kind of no tzibur. It's when the person has this incredible desire to reach out to everyone, but actually is only reaching out to himself. He's just trying to make a bigger I by getting all these other people to believe what he's not really sure is good. So if you can convince him and him and him, then he's going to feel really good about himself. That's not good. That's not good. Kiruv is the ultimate reclaiming of our community life. The practice of Torah is not the reclaiming. The experience of Torah is the reclaiming, and now those two things will start to go together. Meaning, on the one hand, if I approach Kiruv as, hey, I've got the truth. You're in the dark. Where's my tie? Okay. I will enlighten you with my supreme wisdom, and you will become the person that benefits from this incredible path. I don't go for it. Wrong. And it sets up this crazy power dynamic where you feel you're on top and he's on the bottom, as opposed to a tzibur, two Jews meeting eye to eye. Two Jews. I'm a Jew, you're a Jew. Let's talk. But why would I talk? Well, this is how it happens. If you do the first part of relationship to Torah, then the second part starts to work. What's the first part? The first part is that when you yourself embody the Torah, not as a ritualistic practice, but as an experience of life. And Ma'ariv is not an obligation, it's an articulation. And tefillin aren't what I have to do, but they're the way I get an even deeper connection. And Shabbos isn't a set of restrictions, of nitty-gritty details that I'm trying to avoid doing, but an expansive permission to return to an unfiltered state of being. When my experience of Judaism is real, and it's not just ritual performance, it's something that I'll be compelled to share with someone else, and I'll invite him to join the experience. And I'll never fall into the trap of trying to convince him about my point, because it's not an intellectual pursuit. That's ritual and religion. It's about a shared experience that you can become a part of. And when my motive is to allow someone else to enjoy the beauty that I'm experiencing, then it works beautifully, because there's no argument. There's just sharing. But when my motive is to get the person into the same trouble I'm in, why should I be the only Jew in the world that has to do a long tachnun twice a week? Why do I have to get stuck with these Rashis, these parashas which have got enormous Rashis on them? I'm trying to do Shnai Mikveh Chotargum in such a way that I can cover the ground, make sure I don't see it, just cover it. So I want to get, I'm in this, I want to get other people into the trap that I've got into. So I'm going to convince them, I'm going to persuade them, I'm going to give them proofs, because I'm going to bludgeon them into acceptance. And then they can also become victims of the same trouble that I'm facing. Not good, not good, not good. But when I experience Yiddishkeit as my being, it's who I am, it's my identity, it's the way I flow with the world. And I recognize that mitzvahs aren't superimposed onto myself, but they come from deep within. When I'm oisek b'Torah b'mitzvahs in a real way, I'm oisek. They preoccupy me. Umispalal im hatzibur, and I have the capacity to connect to people outside of me. That creates the geula. That's what does it. That's actually what does it. So therefore, when I thought about what to call this little chat that we're having, and I came up with the idea of reclaiming our lives, Shiva Asa B'Tammuz is an opportunity to reclaim our lives. It's a complete and total shift from the day that we try to avoid because it's so uncomfortable. No, because what happens like this. When you disconnect from the pleasure machine, you reconnect to yourself, to your being, to your people, to your God. It's awesome. may be painful. That first pulling out of the plug may feel very, very, very harsh. It may awaken a certain sense of fear. But we've got to reclaim our lives. And when we reclaim our lives, then we can go and offer this opportunity to other people to reclaim theirs. And therefore, Kiruv is this kind of interesting symbiosis where I'm often at a loss to know who gets off better. When you have a person who's been brought up in ritualistic skeleton Judaism, keeping the bones alive but having nothing inside, and then he meets a Jew who knows nothing. And the Jew says to him, so tell me, why is it you wear that little beanie on your head? And you go, it's called a yarmulke, or kippah. He goes, so why'd you wear it? You go, I don't know. And so why'd you put on those black boxes made from leather, perfectly square and black? And why are they perfectly square and black? And you go, I don't know. Because you can't say to him, well, so I avoid the guilt of not doing it, because it's not going to work. So what happens is, he actually awakens inside of you a new impetus to reclaim your own life. So what's the solution to the disaster of Shiva Tammuz? It's quite simple. Understand in your mind that we have to reclaim the reality of the experience of Judaism. Understand that we have to reclaim ourselves as a tzibur, an inclusive, global community of Jews. And in order to do so, there has to be magnanimous sharing of this experience to people who don't yet have the entrance point, the portal to go within. And when we do that, it will be this incredibly win-win situation where the people who are being invited to come in will awaken within you a depth. And when you will awaken within them an understanding. And this process will continue. And this yachsei goimnim, each one gives to the other, will create a new kind of Kollel Yisrael. A Kollel Yisrael which can return to the state which was before this tragic day. And I end off with the beautiful words of the Slicha that we said today, which are very moving. She'enu shoichein ruma. Turn towards us, the one that dwells on high. V'kabeitz nefutzoiseinu mikatzvos adama. Let's go all together. Bring us back together. The Python celebrates the notion of community, saying, let's get it back together. Hashem, look at us. Bring us together again. Reclaim our tzibur, everyone together, not a single person missing. Toisif yadcha sheinis liknois ayuma. Try again to give us a Torah. This time real, like you did when you're giving us those first luchos. Intrinsic, experiential, intuitive. V'toimar, letzion, kuma, and speak out to Zion and say, arise. V'shiva asur b'Tammuz, and this day of Shiva asur b'Tammuz, hafach lanu l'yoyim Yeshua v'nechama, will transform into a day of comfort and salvation. Amen. Ken Yiratzin.